So now I would like to introduce Andy Hoffman, our next speaker. Andy is the Holcomb Professor of Sustainable Enterprise at the University of Michigan. This is a position that holds joint appointments at both the Stephen M. Ross School of Business and the School of Natural Resources and Environment. Within this role, Andy also serves as the director of the Frederick A. and Barbara M. Erb Institute for Global Sustainable Enterprise. He's published many, many books and articles, a couple of which, as we said, are available at the back today, and we hope you'll take advantage of that. Andy earned his PhD from MIT. Please help me by welcoming Andy Hoffman.
And do I use this to move them? Or? Okay, great. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I'll try and move quickly to make sure you all get out of here by 2 o'clock, and be sure to grab books on your way out the door. What I study is social change. What I study is the way people think, the way cultures think, and how that shifts over time. And so what I'm going to do with you today is try and take you through, in 10 slides, a history of where we've been and where we're going on the issue of sustainability. I think those of you who are in the field of education, this is a question that we've been working on for quite a bit. You know, where is sustainability education now? Where does it need to go in order to deal with the issues we face? It's an issue of practice. What are you expected to do now? What are you expected to do in the future? And in particular, it's an issue for the young people in the room, because the world you're inheriting and the world you're going to make could use some help, and it's really about how you think about these issues now and in the future. At the root of it, for me, the old adage that everything, if you hold a hammer, everything looks like a nail, my hammer is social theory, social change. I look at environmental issues as cultural issues, front and center. I was fascinated by the presentation because before I was a professor, I was a general contractor. I built custom homes. And what they're doing there with a green roof is a shift in thinking about what a house is. When I built houses, it was about keeping all the elements out there and keeping me in here, warm and dry, and never the two shall meet. The idea of introducing dirt on a roof, that makes absolutely no sense. I want that roof as clean, as pristine as possible, even to the point where we put cedar shingles on the roof. You can bleach them to make sure that nothing grows up there that you don't want to grow. Well, this is a totally different conception of what is a house, and connecting it with the environment, taking those downspouts, bringing it into rain barrels, thinking about the environment and the house as interconnected. When I was building houses, they were totally separate, and I wanted to keep them that way. So at the root of it, it's how we think. And so what I want to do with you today in the next 20 minutes or so, and let me make sure I take out my watch to stay on time, is to try and give you my sense of how I think things are evolving. And I want to start with a quote from William Gibson. I love this quote. The future is already here, it's just not very evenly distributed. I would add a second thought to that comment, and that is that the future is not set and it is not analyzed, the future is made. So we don't know exactly what the future is going to be, but there are glimpses of it in the heads of the people in this room. Some people can see things that other people can't. Some people can see out into the future in ways that other people can't. That's at the end the essence of business, isn't it? Is understanding where the market is going so you can be there and have a successful business. If you can't predict where the market is going, you can't have a successful business. And sustainability is more and more a business issue, and so understanding where it's going is critical to having a sustainable business and to having a sustainable world. So I want to start with that thought, that way of thinking, and then I want to ask you, what kind of a world do you see right now? What kind of a world do you live in? We all create the world we live in. What kind of a world do you see? There are multiple worlds out there. Certainly we have an amazing institution called the market, and the market makes all things possible for us today. The fact that I am standing here right now is in large part the product of the market, because I live in a different world where the food I eat, the shelter I have, the clothes I wear, the mobility I enjoy comes from the market, and it allows us to live better lives. In fact, if you go back to 1900, the average life expectancy of an American was 47.3 years. So I would not be standing here right now. 100 years ago, I would be dead. And today, it's 77.3 years. So I have quite a bit more years to enjoy. And it's because of the great things that business and the market has brought us. You can't ignore that. It's an amazing institution. What comes with that are some problems, though, that we're becoming more and more aware of today. On the environmental side, we can start talking about species extinction, fishery stocks being extracted over their limits, deforestation, greenhouse gas emissions, and the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, a group set up by the UN, concluded that humans have changed the Earth's ecosystems over the past 50 years more rapidly and extensively than in any comparable period of time in human history. We are changing the world we live in environmentally, and the market is the primary means through which we do it. That's one side of the equation. The other is the social, that the impacts of the market and the impacts of the both positive and negative aspects of the market are not evenly distributed. And so as world population grows, we have to consider that in this conversation. We're consuming the world's resources at an extremely large rate. And that consumption is not evenly distributed. The richest 20% of the world's population, us, consume 86% of all goods and services. The poorest 20% consume just 1.2%. And if that doesn't drive it home, the richest 3 people in the world have assets that exceed the combined gross domestic product of the 48 least developed nations. Certainly that's not sustainable on a social level, especially with social media making so much more transparency around the world. And so I offer you these lenses. What kind of a world do you see? What kind of a world do you live in? Now, when I teach this material in a business school, I teach it as a market shift. I teach it as demand from the market for companies to do things differently and reward them for doing it. So when I talk about sustainability in the business classroom, I don't talk about carbon loading or biological oxygen demand. I talk about cost of capital, operational efficiency, consumer demand. That gets people's attention in a business world. You have to speak in the language of the audience you're addressing. I've given talks to audiences, business audiences, that have not been terribly friendly to the notion of climate change. I gave one to the, I won't say the name, a group, and it started, there was a table in front of me, the audience was sitting down, and a gentleman sat down and slapped a book on the table. The title was facing me, and it was called The Climate Hoax. So I had a sense of where this gentleman may be coming from. And in the beginning, when I was talking about climate change, he interrupted. He said, "But it's not true. Climate change is not real." To which I said, "I don't care. You can be agnostic about the science of climate change and still see it as a business issue. Regulation, insurance costs, a major factor now, consumers, employees, young people want to see companies addressing this issue, suppliers and buyers, all throughout the supply chain, sustainability becomes translated into a business issue." This is Sustainability 101. This is where we are right now. And when I teach this, I don't teach corporate social responsibility. I don't like that idea. If I teach CSR, I'm telling my students, go into your other classes, learn how to maximize NPV, ROI, ROA. Come into my class, I'm going to teach you a different value set. That's not sustainable. I want students to come out of my classes with the idea that I can be a business manager and address the sustainability issues of our day. And that's a real challenge, but that's what makes this exciting. That's what makes this about business strategy. And for that reason, I really try and banish from the brains of all my students, and I would like to do this everywhere I can, banish from your brains the question, does it pay to be green? It is a nonsensical question. What I have up here is innovation in the face of a market shift. To ask, does it pay to be green, is the exact same thing as saying, does it pay to innovate? If it pays to innovate, anyone can do it. Not anyone can do it. We know that. Depends on who's doing it, when they're doing it, how they're doing it. Is the market ready? Have they got all the pieces in place? It really requires some very, very smart people to innovate in the shift of a market. So does it pay to be green? It's a nonsensical question. Are you doing it in a smart way? Are you doing it in the right way? Are you able to make a successful business out of addressing these issues? That's the key question. That's what we need to focus on. And so that's where I think about a market shift on sustainability. So we have a number of items up there. You can invest your retirement account in incandescent light bulb companies. I would actually argue that that would be a very unwise thing to do. Incandescent light bulbs are on their way out. But where should you invest them? Should you invest them in compact fluorescents? Or should you invest them in LEDs? This is a very interesting market shift, not just because it's shifting technology, but it shifts the players. I have another slide I use to do this with my students, and I show a typewriter on the bottom left, and a lot of my students have never seen one. How many people have never actually seen a typewriter? You've all seen typewriters. Wow, you're enlightened students. I recently got a chance to show my 18-year-old nephew his first rotary dial telephone. He'd never seen one before. His first question was, how do you reset it? But to me, it's all about how you think. And so I show them the typewriter, and then I say, how many people have seen one of these? And most haven't. And I said, now, who's heard of Smith Corona, Brother, or IBM? Oh, I've heard of IBM. Well, those were the 3 top typewriter manufacturers. One of them saw the market shift in play. The other 2 couldn't figure it out. The other 2 are gone. And if you remember that shift, and I remember it vividly, all these weird hybrids of the Smith Corona and Brother trying to create these weird pseudo computers, really not grasping what this was all about. Well, the shift from one lighting system to another changes the players. The technology that's necessary to make an incandescent light bulb is the exact same technology to make a compact fluorescent. You take electricity, you pass it through a filament or a gas, it gets excited, it creates light, off you go. LEDs are solid-state technology. It's a different set of players. It's that big a shift in the market. And the benefits to it are beyond just the energy use in making the light, the lumens, but it also is lower cost in maintenance because they last so much longer. So in fact, right now, Ann Arbor is shifting out its street lights to LED lights. The savings are in millions of dollars a year. Most of those come from reduced maintenance. Different way of thinking about what's going on here. Again, as we start to think about the culture change around different kinds of lighting, when you go to the store to buy a light bulb, you buy it by the wattage. You buy it by how much energy you use. We make some strange translation in our head. 100 watts makes this much light. But that doesn't work with CFLs and it doesn't work with LEDs. We need to learn about color rendering index, color temperature, and lumens. And that's a big shift. This is a country that couldn't get its arms around the idea of shifting from English to metric tools. So this shift around lighting is a real challenge in how we think. That's what we're facing, and that's the kind of market shift in play. We could talk about your standard thermostat up there on the upper left, or we can move towards an eco dashboard to its right, which will give you a real-time display of your energy and water use, or a Nest thermostat that will not only do that, but will also learn your behavior. And that, to me, is the tip of the iceberg of where we're going when you start to think about smart homes, smart cars, smart roads, smart buildings, integration, information, connecting it all together, where we will be going forward on sustainability because of information technology is phenomenal. And again, the idea of culture change and how we think. You can install that eco dashboard in your house, and it gives you a real-time display of water and energy. And then your son or daughter, or you guys may go home and take your normal Saturday morning shower for 2 hours and nice hot water. And you can come downstairs and find your father standing there with his arms crossed and saying, see that? That's how much your shower just cost me. I actually can connect behavior and outcome. It used to be, I got my energy bill at the end of every month. I just paid it. I have no idea how that happened. Now I can actually connect the two and say, if you will take a shorter shower, I will give you a bigger allowance. I will actually pay you, or I understand the behavior. Or people will go on vacation. They'll shut everything down. And then they'll say, wait a minute, the house is still drawing power. What's going on here? And they'll start to learn about phantom loads, and they'll start to learn about all those things in the house that are using energy right now for someone who's not there. That plasma TV, that 50-inch plasma TV that you love so much uses more power turned off than a regular TV uses turned on, because you got to keep the plasma warm. The hot water heater at my house right now is using energy to create hot water for someone who's not there. This makes no sense, but we need to think differently about how we do it and go from there. I'm going to stop there because I want to bring it to where I really want the talk to go. But this is Sustainability 101. This is where we are right now. Sustainability has gone mainstream. I heard something I never thought I'd heard a dean of a business school say when I first got into this, but just last year, the dean of the business school at Michigan, my boss, said sustainability is table stakes in business education today. Like, wow. Okay, there's a shift in thinking. And so now you guys can leave here. You can stay at a sustainable hotel. You can buy a sustainable car. You can eat sustainable food. You can go down the list. Everything's sustainable. You can go into a company. There's a chief sustainability officer producing a sustainability report. You have scholars doing sustainability research. Sustainability is here. The problem's solved. Or is it? No, the fact is the problem is not solved. The problem continues to get worse. And now let me explain how I can try and pull this all together with the idea of the fourth wave. Those of us who study social theory and social change understand that social systems, societies, cultures, they shift through sudden spurts. It's not a steady progression. You can just think about the media cycle. We don't do anything until there's some large attention in the media. We need some kind of an event to sort of catalyze us to say we need to do something about that. We do something, and then we forget about it. That's the way society works. Anthony Downs wrote about this called the issue attention cycle. But we have these events that happen. They are anomalies. We had this world, Thomas Kuhn talks about this in the Structure of Scientific Revolutions. You have a paradigm. This helps us understand the world. Here's a set of rules, here's a set of norms, of beliefs that make us understand the world around us. And then something happens, and it doesn't fit. There's something wrong. And we come up with a different solution, and then we settle down to a different set of rules. We go from what he calls normal science to revolutionary science to normal science. These bumps are revolutionary science, each precipitated by events that were anomalous. They didn't make sense. So you go back into the 60s, and engineering was doing amazing things, producing fuels and materials, fertilizers, making the world a better place. And then Rachel Carson came along and said, actually, no, you're actually causing problems. You're killing ourselves by doing all this. And it was countercultural. And industry said, you're out of your mind, you're an hysterical woman, is what they told her. And she was challenging the dominant beliefs. That got built upon by fish kills up and down the Mississippi River, the Cuyahoga River, so contaminated it caught on fire. And then the first Earth Day in 1970, where 20 million people showed up to focus on something we didn't know what. That day was the day the word environmentalist was coined, and it was coined by the media to figure out who in the world are these 20 million people that just showed up on campuses around the country. That made it a voter issue. And Richard Nixon saw this, so did Edwin Muskie. And out of that, the answer is regulation. We develop regulations. Problem solved, attention drops off. Within the company, it's regulatory compliance. Government tell us what to do, we'll do it. We don't need to worry about it. We're going to hire someone, it's going to be regulatory affairs. They're going to be on the back 40. Don't tell us how to make our product or even what product to make. Just make sure we're in compliance with the regs. Done. Attention drops off. And then in the late 80s, early 90s, some anomalies start to happen again. Bhopal and scores of people killed in India for a contamination release from a chemical plant. The Exxon Valdez. The ozone hole is discovered, and the idea that aerosol propellants are actually destroying the ozone hole that protects us from the sun. A whole host of events emerge, and a new problem comes up, and we start to figure out what it is. And in particular, what I find fascinating in this is that insurance companies started to wake up and say, because of Bhopal, we are not prepared for the liabilities of environmental disasters. They pulled back environmental insurance. They brought it back at about 10 times the cost. That monetized the issues. Companies started to sue each other over environmental liabilities, particularly around Superfund. That monetized them even more and made them competitive. And environmental issues started to become strategic. And this is when business schools started to wake up that this was something important. And attention drops off. Today we're in the third wave. It's around sustainability. Certainly climate change is a big driver of this, sort of the mother of all environmental issues, both in terms of changing the market but also changing the way we think. And it's a fundamental shift in how we think, and I'll get to that in a second. But we are, I'll leave it to you. Are we still on the rise? Have we come over the top? Are we starting to come down the other side? I might frame it differently. Are people experiencing sustainability fatigue and sustainability cynicism? I think there's a good argument to be made that some people are. The term has become politicized. I have a CEO coming to campus, coming to the Urb Institute of Global Sustainable Enterprise. Said, you're going to talk about sustainability? No, we don't talk about that. No, not sustainability. What do you want to talk about? We want to talk about food security. Fine with me. But sustainability itself is starting to become anathema for people. Will attention start to drop off? Will the notion that we have a chief sustainability officer, that we have sustainable hotels, sustainable food, sustainable cars, you go down the list, is that our problem statement? At which case we will start to drop off and not attend to this issue? Fair question. What will be the fourth wave? If this drops off, what will be the events and what will be the crisis that will manifest ourselves in the fourth wave? And that's what I want to talk about today. To me, the fourth wave is around the idea of grasping the notion that we have entered the Anthropocene. Now, the Anthropocene is the idea that we have entered a new geological epoch where you cannot describe the global ecosystem without including humans. Scientists are pushing forward this idea, and the idea is that beginning with the Industrial Revolution is when we began the period of the Anthropocene. They talk about the great acceleration in the 50s and 60s in which our impact on the environment is too large to be ignored when we start to think about the history of the Earth. Think about that for a second. That is a big cultural shift. Right now, humans have transformed 1/3 to 1/2 of all the landmass on the planet. Right now, human industry produces more nitrogen than is fixed naturally by all terrestrial ecosystems. Right now, we use more than half of the world's readily available fresh water. We are altering the global climate with greenhouse gases. I was talking recently with a research chemist at Pfizer, and a drug company is very concerned about chemicals in the environment. And he just dropped into the conversation, matter-of-factly, there are measurable levels of ibuprofen in the Mediterranean Sea. And so we just stop and say, just think about what you just said. Just think about it. We are part of that environment out there. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means we need to change the way we think on a very, very large scale. And so this is the idea of the Enlightenment, a shift of that magnitude. I'm doing this fast, and I hope you'll stay with me. But if you go back to the Enlightenment, prior to that, we understood the world around us through superstition and religion. The environment was animated by mystical forces that we didn't understand. But then along comes Descartes and the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution, and we now start to understand the world as a machine. We understand our bodies as a machine as well. And we can break apart those pieces, tinker with them, put them back together again, and create whatever we wish. We now understand what's going on out there through total rationalism. But the issues of the Anthropocene say we may have missed the target a little bit, and there are things going on out there we don't fully understand, and there are things that are going on out there we're not in total control over. And how do we think about that in the context of the market? How do we think about that fundamental shift in how we think about the world out there and our place within it when it comes to the market? And that brings us to the fourth wave. Now, what kind of events could create concerns like this? Certainly, the impacts of climate change can start to do this. If you start to, if you really need to get people's attention, you start to monetize it. 2012 was the second most expensive year in insurance payouts due to weather disasters. 2005 was the worst. Payouts for natural catastrophes on a steady upward trend with more uncertainty, more erratic fluctuations year by year. And interestingly, with insurance companies, steady upward trends don't get them nervous. Unpredictability gets them nervous. That's what gets them really, really concerned, and that's what starts to drive price up. And I call out the insurance sector in particular because if you really want to change the market, change insurance. You cannot drive your car, you can't go to the hospital, you can't build a building, you can't do anything without insurance. Insurance makes the market go. It's a real bedrock pillar. And so as insurance companies start to think about this, off we go. But insurance payouts could drive that. Traffic congestion on a scale that was unimaginable might do that. And if you saw last year, China had a 7-day traffic jam. Can happen. China is sort of the poster child of some of the problems we could be facing when we start to think about the fourth wave. That the pollution in China, if you saw this story in Time magazine 2 months ago, the pollution in Beijing is so bad they've created an LED screen where they project the sunrise and the sunset so people can see it, because you can't see it anymore. The World Bank has estimated a loss of GDP of 4 to 5% because of pollution, and the World Health Organization says that the lifespan of the average Chinese in some areas is dropped by 4 to 5 years because of pollution. That's when you stop and say, wait a minute, we've got an anomaly here. The existing rules, they don't work anymore. We need to find another way. We need to think things through differently. There are other events we can start to think about. I do think that there have to be, the social elements of the events are critically important. I highlight the difference between Katrina and Sandy. Both of them, scientists tried to say, well, climate change may have had a role. They may not have caused them, but they may have made them worse. On their technical aspects, they're the same. A storm hits a major urban center, causes tremendous damage, loss of life, pain. Critical difference between the two events: one hit a poor, minority, politically disconnected population. The other hit an affluent, white, politically connected population with a charismatic mayor who had direct channels to Washington right before a presidential election to say, folks, this was climate change. The social dimensions of these events are critically important as we start to think about social change and identifying anomalies that emerge. So what could be in the fourth wave? This is where we're starting to think about curriculum. And I'm trying to figure out, what do we need to start to be teaching students to be prepared for a future in the Anthropocene as a business person? Well, right off the bat, we have to start thinking in terms of systems. The notion that an electric utility could put in a wind farm and say, hey folks, we're sustainable, it doesn't make sense. You have to start to think about the entire energy grid and talk about a sustainable grid. You have to talk about generation, transmission, distribution, use. You have to figure out how to way to work mobility into it so that the entire energy system is now sustainable. How do we think about that? How do we think about new material supply chains? Move beyond linear supply chains to start to think about more closed loop and recycling, and again, a shift in mindset. My undergraduate degree is in chemical engineering. I got it in 1983. In 1983, when we did a plant design, we would have a flow-through diagram through all the materials, and it was one way. At the end, there was an arrow off to the edge of the page, and it simply said, to waste, because that's the way we thought about it. Gone, done. Today, that would actually be dereliction of duty, the amount of materials, the costs that go with that, but it needs to go further. New kinds of partnerships and thinking differently about partnerships, not just between companies, but between companies and NGOs and with the government, all three starting to play a role. Thinking about careers differently. Students coming out of business programs today are not queuing up for singular careers in business management. They could jump into the nonprofit sector, government, back again. In fact, I personally think that we start to rethink how we think about management, nonprofit management, business management, government management. Certainly there are domains that are distinct among the three, but there are some domains that are similar. Just this evening, I have to get back to Ann Arbor. The governor is going to speak. The governor is an example. He used to be the chairman of the board of Gateway Computers. The head of the Nature Conservancy right now, Mark Tersick, came from J.P. Morgan, I believe. The ability to move around, you have much more malleable careers than those that came before. Start to think differently about organizations. You go into a business school right now and you're mostly taught that the shareholder form of capitalism is the way we set up an organization. It's burned in our brain. I remember after 9/11, the New York Times had a story, and we were all trying to figure out who was Al-Qaeda. And they drew this picture to get us to understand who was Al-Qaeda. And it was a pyramid corporate chart. At the top was the CEO. His name was Osama bin Laden, and then he has vice presidents and his division directors. And it looked just like a Fortune 500 company, because that's the way we think. And it was totally absurd. There's no way that Al-Qaeda was set up like a New York Stock Exchange company. It's just not the only way to set up organizations, but we need to start to think differently about that as well. Employee-owned. Benefit corporations. Start to think about different forms there. And in fact, Jerry Davis at Michigan's doing a lot of work on this. In terms of absolute numbers, the shareholder corporation, in terms of absolute numbers, is declining. His concern is private equity starting to come in a much stronger way, and that has some transparency issues that makes him very uncomfortable, but we now need to start to think differently about organizations. Different kinds of strategies and markets. If you are privy to conversations within the big three auto companies, the future of designing the automobile is not for the suburban driver in the United States. It's for the driver in China, India, Brazil, and elsewhere. Companies are looking well beyond American borders to start to think about the markets they serve. And then I would add one last thing here, two last things. When we really start to want to think differently, we start to recognize that waves 1, 2, 3 have all been about reducing unsustainability. Sooner or later, we have to start to think about creating sustainability. And there are two very different ways of approaching this. It's two very different paradigms of thinking. Think about it this way, and this is what John and I wrote about it in the book. In Iraq, we stopped the war. That is a fundamentally different process than creating peace. How do we think about that in terms of sustainable business? There's a real Gordian knot to try and crack, but that's how we have to start to think differently. And so the idea of a house that integrates nature within it, the trom wall, using the sun, there are so many ways we can start to think about integrating more closely with the environment and not battling it and trying to control it is where we need to go. So, moving away from reducing unsustainability to creating sustainability on the right-hand side. How do we do that? Where do we go? I'm often asked, are you hopeful that we'll do it? And when I answer yes, the answer is always the same. That's because you hang out with students. And it's true. I do think that there are two primary drivers that tell us that we will get this solved. One is it will be solved by business. If you think about over time the locus of power in our society, for a long time it was the church, and then it was displaced by government, and now is displaced by business. Business is the most powerful institution on earth. You can lament that fact, you can resist it, but it is a fact. The power that the corporate sector has. If they are not developing these solutions, there will be no solutions. And companies are starting to say some very interesting things. If you want to read some very unusual quotes, take a look at the words of Paul Pullman at Unilever, talking about the idea that he wants to do away with quarterly reports. He says that the government has not been stepping up, business has to step up for it. Some very, very interesting comments, but the business sector is starting to step in, and I do find it curious and interesting that if you went back 10, 15 years, when people went into college and they wanted to change the world around them, they went into schools of government and they went into schools of nonprofit management, and now they're going into schools of business because they see business as a lever to try and make change. And that social change, I see young people is really getting us here. So when I do talk about hope, I do talk about young people, and I do draw a very sharp distinction between being optimistic and being hopeful. Optimistic is looking at the odds and saying they're in your favor. Being hopeful is saying, I don't care what the odds are, I'm going to do it anyway. And hope is what's going to get us there, and hope is in young people. David Orr at Oberlin College has a wonderful quote. He says, hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. And I really like that idea. I'm not just placing a bet, but young people will be committed to doing this. The future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed, and I would say more unevenly distributed in young people who see answers, where those of us who have been at this for a while see only problems. Those of us who get older, we're becoming ossified in our belief systems, and we can't see the opportunities before us. So the last slide, and I do this to my students, is I put up this picture, and these are my grandparents. And you can see my grandmother lived quite a long time. And when she died, I looked at the changes she saw in her lifetime. She saw indoor electrification, indoor plumbing. She saw from horse and carriage to the automobile. She saw the first plane. She saw jet travel, man land on the moon. And I thought, boy, no one will see the kind of change in their life that she saw in hers. But I think I'm wrong. And so I'd ask everyone in the room to try this, but particularly the young people. Think of the year you were born. And if you're male, add 69 to that year. And if you're female, add 71. And that number you have is statistically the year you will die. Now try and think about what kind of a world is that going to be. I bet you can't. Just the change that's gone on in such a short period of time with this thing. And where is this going to go? I have no idea, but I can tell you it's going to be a fundamentally different world than we can imagine right here in this room. But I'm willing to bet young people can imagine it much better than we can, because the generation that precedes always looks back and, oh, these young people, they have so many problems, they'll never figure it out. You know, my generation was supposed to be all drug addicted and sex crazed, and we seem to work that one out. We're not. And people look at social media and young people and say, oh, you know, your whole world, how do you manage this? But they'll figure it out too. And I do think the sustainability challenges, they will figure out as well. So I'll try and leave on a happy note, because I do think that environmentalists too often focus on the negative. Schellenberger and Nordhaus had a really great criticism of the environmental movement in an essay called The Death of Environmentalism, where they pointed out that they're always gloom and doom, always focus on the problem than on solutions, but people are much more motivated by a desired future than they are about a scared past. And so he pointed out that Martin Luther King had a speech called I Have a Dream, not I Have a Nightmare. That motivates people to act. And so I'll leave you with this quote from Stephen Jay Gould, which I think captures where we are right now. And the quote is this: "We have become, by the power of a glorious evolutionary accident called intelligence, the stewards of life's continuity on Earth. We did not ask for this role, but we cannot abjure it. We may not be suited to it, but here we are." Thank you very much. Sorry, is there time? Oh, great.
Nice job.
Okay.
We have a few minutes if you have some questions for Andy. Mike's going to come around.
Thank you, Andrew. Great talk. Andrew, with your background in working in academia, one issue we have out in the field as a contractor, solar contractor, is these troughs, this wave and trough that you're talking about. As you remember, being in the business, a lot of things happen once the CFO is on board. And what are we doing? I understand working with the students and in the academia world with triple bottom line, but I'm finding it's having a hard time working its way into the Western business model. Mm-hmm. Can you update a little bit? Are we making some headway somewhere?
Yeah, that's a really great question. At the Herb Institute, we graduate students who get an MBA and an MS from the School of Natural Resources and Environment. And one deliberate choice we've made is our goal is not to create students that want to be the CSO, Chief Sustainability Officer. We want to create students that are going to be the Chief Financial Officer or the Chief Executive Officer. To do that, it has to become material. You have to translate it into dollars and cents. You're not going to get the CFO's attention unless you do that. And so how do we make these issues material? So on climate change, the payouts, insurance, I think is the smoking gun that's really going to start to shift this conversation. And that will get the CFO's attention. But you have to monetize it. It has to be monetized. Otherwise, the CFO it's not going to show up on his radar screen. Risk management, yeah, that scares people. I look at risk management as the gateway drug towards business opportunity. You know, first get them scared that this is going to hurt, and then say, okay, now there's a way to avoid the hurt by looking at something better. That's challenging, but it's the first way in. But you want to try and get through that. You know, it's like threatening you, I'm going to punch you unless you walk through the door. I want you to walk through the door. I don't want you to stand there and cower in face of the threatened punch. But certainly that's a part of it.
Your presentation is intriguing, and you do a fantastic job of getting your point across. I have two responses to two things that you talked about. The first, you talk about insurance being the payout and being a force behind things. What I've read on the insurance companies, the research to prevent asbestos-type situations from reoccurring, the 5 things that are most important to them right now that they see as the highest risk is nanotechnology, regulations, fracking, and then you get into radio frequency, AMR, and cybersecurity. And those last 2 things, the cybersecurity and the RF, are directly related to this whole idea of having a smart grid, smart meters, smart nested thermostats, smart cars, everything interacted and everything. That idea of sustainability and that solution represents two of the highest risks to the insurance companies. And then my second comment, unless you'd like to comment on that.
Well, I mean, these issues are complex. So, you know, when Google bought Nest, my first thought was they bought the information. What are they going to do with it? We still haven't worked out privacy issues in the cybersphere. But that doesn't mean we won't or can't. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't start to try and figure it out. So I think that yes, you know, there was a Ford exec I just heard got into big trouble at a conference saying, you know, we have all this data of the way you use your car because we have computers in the car. And he's had to do a retraction, back up. People are very, very sensitive to these issues right now, but it doesn't mean we won't figure it out. I'm a hopeful person.
Awesome. And then the second thing, I'll bring up Rachel Carlson, and I'll have a hysterical woman moment here. With the light bulbs, the incandescent light bulb, yes, it uses more energy, but the solutions right now, the LEDs and the compact fluorescent bulbs, create dirty electricity. They have metals in them. They have mercury. They have nickel, cadmium. Heavy metals, or excuse me, I think the LEDs have rare metals in them, and the you know, so they screw up the power factor on the grid. So that, you know, we have to be I just want to caution people that all of these ideas that are green, there's health effects associated with them, and there's where you get these rare earth metals, where are you mining them, and we just have to have some caution. So.
I think that's a strong statement that all these solutions are green, have health effects with them. I think that new technologies are complex, both in the way they're developed and their interaction with society and how we use them. But again, being aware of the issues that come with them can develop solutions to find ways forward. You know, in the area of solar, you know, there are issues with the materials in solar cells. The key to getting rooftop solar in home applications is not to have the homeowner buy it, but to have a third-party vendor buy them and lease them to you, because they can depreciate the asset. So the financing works. That's also good because, quite frankly, I don't want to own that stuff. I don't want to own batteries either. I don't want to own a battery pack to have a solar on my roof, and I don't want to own a battery pack in a car. I want the company to take it back and figure out what to do with it. There are answers to these issues, and we need to call them out. I agree with you entirely. But I do feel that oftentimes we leave people stuck. It always boils down to, is it the cloth diapers or the disposable? Is it the paper or the plastic? And you always have these competing arguments, and we live in such politicized times that it gets very hard to make any decisions, and you suddenly find yourself paralyzed. And we're moving. We've got to try and get things to move in the right direction.
One more question?
Yeah, back in the back here. I have a small business and deal a lot with kind of young entrepreneurship. And when I approach my investors, they really kind of talk about that single bottom line. But kind of the sustainability movement is really ingrained in that triple bottom line thought process. I see it a lot spoken, and I see it a lot enacted in some local businesses. But when you're a young startup company and you've got these big ideas, when you go to investment companies and investment firms, they really just talk about that single bottom line. I would imagine you come across that a lot, particularly at Ross, where you will see hopefuls and entrepreneurs wanting to engage in a sustainable business practice. Can you talk a little bit about steering young people into making sure that the dollars and cents are working out before they're moving ahead?
Mm-hmm. Well, point number one there is you can't have a sustainable business that goes out of business, so you got to make money. Point number two is I'm not entirely comfortable with the triple bottom line. I think it's a nice metric to start to think about these issues, but at the end of the day, you have to have a capital E called economic and small e's on environment and equity. That's just the way it's going to be. And I think that it's interesting that when a technology or an idea or a business model emerges that's CSR, it's measured on the triple bottom line, and then when it goes mainstream, it just becomes standard business practice, and it's no longer in those other two buckets. To me, that means it just succeeded. It's now something that we measure on economic terms. So you really want to put everything into cost and capital. If you can put an innovation on sustainability in terms of earnings per share, that this added 5 cents to our share price, you've got it. If you can show, this goes back to the CFO question, if you really want to talk to your investors, you can find, you can always find angel investors, you can find social responsible investors, you can go for that if you want, but if you want to go to mainstream money, you're going to have to show that, you know what, the market does want a thermostat that helps me understand my energy use and will actually do some thinking for me so that I don't have to program the thing. It will go, my house is on vacation mode right now. It did it because I left. I didn't have to set the thermostat down. People love this. An important thing about the Nest also is it's beautifully designed. It has to appeal to the market. It has to be a smart business. I played with all kinds of other quote-unquote smart thermostats before that. They were clunky, they were ugly, they were awkward. This one's slick. This one is starting to go in a direction that's serving a customer need in the mainstream, not just the green consumer, which is probably about 12–14% of the market, because that's a nice market to be in if you want to stay niche. But if you really want to go mainstream, you got to hit mainstream consumers. To do that, you have to have a sound business model that in many ways put those other two E's over here or turns them into the big E with economic. That is the language of business. I want to be able to put it in terms of ROI, ROA, NPV, and then I'll have a sustainable, successful business. Okay.